Okay, so you want to understand how a scam call center actually makes its money, not the version where some guy in a hoodie calls your grandmother about a warranty. The real version. Because by 2024, this industry was pulling in more money annually than the entire economy of most small countries, and almost none of that money came from anyone you'd picture when you hear the word scam call center. In October of 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a 68-page indictment against a man named Chen Ji, the founder of a Cambodian conglomerate called Prince Group. Alongside the indictment, the DOJ seized more than $15 billion in Bitcoin, the largest single asset forfeiture in American history, larger than any drug bust, any Ponzi scheme, any case involving a single criminal network before it. Investigators found a warehouse in Cambodia running what they called a phone farm. 1,250 mobile phones wired together, controlling more than 76,000 fake social media accounts around the clock. Behind those accounts weren't hackers. They were trafficked human beings forced to run those phones under threat of violence inside compounds that, on paper, looked like legitimate business parks. That's the industry. Let's take it apart. Start with revenue, because the numbers here don't behave like normal crime statistics. A 2025 expert assessment put annual scam revenue out of Cambodia alone at up to $19 billion, more than the country's entire garment manufacturing sector, historically its largest legitimate export industry. Zoom out to the wider region, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos combined, and estimates land between $50 and $75 billion a year. For context, that range is comparable to the GDP of a mid-sized country, generated almost entirely by convincing strangers on the internet to move money into accounts that don't exist. The dominant product line is something the industry itself calls pig butchering, from a Chinese phrase meaning to fatten a pig before slaughter. And the name is accurate to the business model in an uncomfortable way. This isn't a smash-and-grab scam where you panic someone into a single wire transfer. It's a long-form con, sometimes running for months, where a scammer builds a romantic or friendly relationship with a target, slowly, patiently, before ever mentioning money. And once trust is established, introduces a once-in-a-lifetime cryptocurrency investment opportunity hosted on a fake trading app built to look identical to a real one. The target invests a little. The fake app shows fake profits. They invest more. At some point, they try to withdraw and are told they owe a tax or a fee or need to unlock their funds with a further deposit. And by design, the amount they've already put in is now too large to walk away from. The average victim identified by the Global Anti-Scam Organization loses approximately $177,000, not the total scammed per operation, per person. The FBI recorded almost $13 billion in reported cyber scam losses in the U.S. in 2023 alone. And by 2024, American losses to pig butchering specifically had crossed $10 billion, a 66% jump in a single year. A 2026 academic study titled Without Irony, The Economics of Pig Butchering, traced $15 billion of victim funds through just 5 cryptocurrency exchanges, including Coinbase, moving from Western victims into the hands of these networks. So that's the top line now, and this is the part that makes this industry economically unlike almost anything else on the planet. Let's talk about labor costs, because in a normal business, labor is your biggest recurring expense. In this business, labor is closer to a one-time acquisition cost, and the acquisition method is human trafficking. Here's how the pipeline actually works, according to reporting from the United Nations, ProPublica, and MIT Technology Review, corroborated by dozens of survivor accounts. A job ad goes up, customer service, tech support, data entry, sometimes even modeling, targeting people in China, Taiwan, India, the Philippines, and increasingly the West. The pay looks great, the interview process looks completely normal, sometimes running multiple rounds, sometimes even including a real plane ticket. Then the applicant lands in Thailand or a neighboring country, gets driven across a border, often at night, often with a vehicle switch partway through to disorient them, and arrives at a compound where their passport is confiscated and they're told they now owe a debt for their transport, room, and board. That debt is the leash. Escape attempts are met with more debt, transfer to a harsher compound, or violence. The United Nations estimates more than 200,000 people have been trafficked into scam compounds across Myanmar and Cambodia alone. Once inside, new arrivals go through what former workers describe as onboarding, training manuals, assigned scripts, and coached personas, essentially building a fake identity and fake life story they'll maintain across hundreds of simultaneous conversations. The manuals recovered by investigators instruct workers to build dependency, to make the target fall for you, using stock photos of attractive people who don't exist. It reads structurally like corporate sales training. It's enforced like a labor camp. Workers who miss their daily quota of messages sent or victims engaged face beatings, food deprivation, electric shock batons, items literally seized during raids alongside the computers, or in some documented cases, are simply sold onward to another compound, the way a piece of equipment gets transferred between departments. So think about what that means for the balance sheet. A legitimate call center's biggest cost is wages, paid every single pay period for as long as the employee works there. A trafficking-funded scam compound pays once, a broker fee, plane ticket, transport across a border, and then extracts unlimited labor under threat of violence for as long as that person survives inside the system. It is, in the coldest possible accounting terms, a fixed cost converted into an unbounded revenue-generating asset. That is not a side effect of the cruelty. That is the entire reason the cruelty exists. It's the single design choice that makes the unit economics of this industry so much more profitable than a legal call center could ever be. Now the infrastructure. These aren't back alley operations, they're closer to industrial parks. Investigators and journalists who've gained access describe repurposed casinos and half-finished hotel developments, buildings originally built for the online gambling boom that collapsed across the region after the pandemic, and repurposed almost overnight into scam compounds once that revenue dried up. A single compound can house a few hundred to several thousand people, complete with dormitories, in-house restaurants, gyms, even small supermarkets. Not for anyone's comfort, but so workers never have a reason to leave the walls. Multiple scam companies can operate inside one compound, some as direct subsidiaries of the group that owns the building, others effectively renting floor space like tenants in a mall, all paying up to the same ownership structure. Security is provided by armed enforcers, CCTV blankets every hallway, and the perimeter is walled, not, notably, to keep intruders out, but to keep the workforce in. This is where Chen Zi's case gives us the clearest picture of scale, because prosecutors weren't describing one call center. They were describing an entire vertically integrated conglomerate. Prince Group, according to the indictment, ran at least 10 separate forced labor compounds across Cambodia. That's the second half of this economy that never gets talked about. Once you've extracted $15 billion from strangers on the internet, you have a second full-time problem, which is making that money look like it came from somewhere legal. That laundering step is its own specialized industry sitting on top of the scam industry. Stolen crypto gets layered through exchanges, converted, moved again, sometimes routed through legitimate platforms specifically because a transaction that touches Coinbase looks cleaner on paper than one that doesn't, which is exactly why researchers were able to trace $15 billion of it. Some networks are documented running their own informal banking and remittance systems, letting them move money regionally without ever touching a system a Western regulator can freeze. The entire backend exists to answer one question. How do you turn a Bitcoin wallet full of stolen money into an apartment building nobody can trace back to a trafficking compound? And for years, the honest answer was, you mostly could, and nobody stopped you. Which brings us to enforcement and why this industry has been so hard to kill even once everyone knew exactly where it was. In January of 2025, a Chinese actor named Wang Xing was lured to Thailand for a fake audition and trafficked across the border into a Myanmar scam compound. Within days, he was located and freed, but the case detonated on Chinese social media, and that public pressure, not years of prior reporting from ProPublica and the UN, is what finally forced Thailand, China, and Myanmar into a coordinated crackdown. Thailand cut electricity, fuel, and internet access to compound-heavy border zones. Myanmar's military government detained over 3,700 foreign nationals tied to scam centers within weeks. China has gone further than anywhere else, extraditing entire crime families and, in some cases, sentencing compound operators to death. The BI syndicate? Convicted on charges including intentional homicide, kidnapping, and running scam operations across 41 separate sites, was found to have earned at least $4 billion. Partly from pig butchering and partly from running a side operation producing 11 tons of methamphetamine. And still, this is the part every investigator interviewed on this topic says explicitly. Raids and sanctions mostly just relocate the problem. Compounds get seized, workers get freed, headlines get written, and the same ownership networks reopen under a new name in a different border town weeks later. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned 19 separate entities across Myanmar and Cambodia in a single action in 2025, explicitly because the previous entities had already been sanctioned once and simply rebranded. The economics explain why. Even after a $15 billion seizure, even after the single largest forfeiture in Department of Justice history, the underlying business model, near zero recurring labor cost, tens of billions in annual revenue, operating from territory with weak governance and porous borders, is still sitting there, fully intact for whoever picks it back up next. So here's the actual shape of this business, stripped down to the balance sheet. Revenue, tens of billions annually, extracted a couple $100,000 at a time from individually targeted victims through a product that takes months to deliver and relies entirely on patience and psychological manipulation rather than urgency or panic. Cost of goods, not wages, but acquisition. A plane ticket and a broker fee per worker, converting a human being into an unpaid production asset through confiscated documents and enforced violence. Overhead, repurposed gambling infrastructure that already existed and just needed new signage. Distribution, laundering networks sophisticated enough to route stolen crypto through the same exchanges everyone else uses, specifically so it doesn't look stolen anymore. And risk. Occasional, geographically contained enforcement action that removes a fraction of the workforce and none of the ownership, who reopen under a different name before the freed workers have even made it home. Every part of that model, the low fixed costs, the enormous margins, the resilience to enforcement, is only possible because the input isn't willing labor. It's the closest thing the current global economy has to a slavery-powered industry, generating tens of billions of dollars a year, run largely undisturbed from land that 3 different governments each insist is somebody else's problem to police. That's the business. The person who texted you last week claiming to be a lonely widow with a hot crypto tip may have had a gun pointed at them the entire time they typed it.